No one had touched the piano in over 40 years. Yet on some nights, when the wind curled through the cracked windows of the old Whitmore house, a faint melody drifted down the hallway, soft, hesitant, like fingers remembering how to play. Neighbors said it was just the wind, but Emma knew better. When she unlocked the door to her late grandmother's home that September afternoon, the scent of cedar polish and dust met her like a memory. The air was heavy with silence, broken only by the creak of the floorboards under her shoes. The sunlight, thin and golden, spilled through the lace curtains, painting slow-moving ghosts across the faded wallpaper. The house hadn't changed since she was a child. Same embroidered cushions, same porcelain vases, same faint hum of something unspoken. She ran her hand along the hallway wall, remembering summers spent here, running up the stairs, hiding behind curtains, listening to her grandmother hum lullabies while watering the violets by the window. But what she remembered most was the piano. It sat in the corner of the parlor, a mahogany upright with ivory keys gone yellow with age. Even as a child, she'd felt it watching her. It wasn't frightening, just aware. Her grandmother used to tell her, "This piano remembers everything it's ever heard, every note, every song, every secret." Back then, Emma thought it was just one of her grandmother's whimsical sayings. But standing there now, as dust motes swirled in the late afternoon light, she wasn't so sure. She stepped closer. The wood gleamed faintly, though no one had polished it in decades. Her reflection wavered in its varnish, older, wearier, a woman in her mid-30s who'd spent too long pretending not to miss the past. Her fingers hovered over the keys. She pressed one gently. It responded with a low, trembling note still alive. The sound echoed softly through the empty room, lingering just a little too long. A chill ran down her spine. She lifted her hand, then froze. A second note rang out higher this time, though she hadn't touched anything. The air stilled. The sound faded, leaving behind a silence that felt almost sentient. "Old strings," she whispered, forcing a nervous laugh. "Probably just settling." But when she turned to leave, something stopped her. A faint slip of paper tucked behind the piano's broken music stand. The corner stuck out just enough to catch her eye. Emma pulled it free. It was brittle, yellowed, torn at the edges. A single line was scrawled across it in ink faded to sepia. "Play the song from 1952. Her heart skipped. She didn't recognize the handwriting, but she knew that year 1952 was when her grandmother's younger brother, Thomas, had vanished. The story had always been a whispered one in the family. A brilliant pianist who'd left home one night for a concert and never returned. No trace, no farewell, just silence. And a piano that no one dared to play again. Emma stared at the note, the ink shimmering faintly under the sunlight. "Play the song from 1952. She turned back to the instrument. Its keys seemed to wait. She sat down slowly, the bench creaking beneath her. For a moment, she just stared at her reflection in the glossy wood, a woman caught between past and present, between disbelief and longing. Her fingers hovered once more above the keys. She didn't know what song it could be, but her grandmother had once told her, in one of those rare, soft moments, "The house keeps what the heart forgets." So Emma closed her eyes and began to play whatever her hands remembered. At first, only silence. Then, as if the piano had been waiting all these years, a melody began to emerge, hesitant, fractured, but undeniably familiar. The notes filled the air like a voice returning from the grave. She didn't know how she knew the song, but her hands moved on their own, tracing a pattern she'd never learned, guided by something older than memory. When the final note lingered and died, Emma opened her eyes and saw something that made her breath catch. The mirror above the piano, cracked and clouded with dust, no longer showed just her reflection. For a brief, trembling second, she swore she saw another pair of hands playing beside hers. The image in the mirror vanished as quickly as it appeared. Emma blinked hard, her pulse racing. The air in the room suddenly too thin. Dust swirled in the shaft of light streaming from the window, making it hard to tell if what she'd seen had been real or just imagination stirred by grief and memory. She stood abruptly, knocking the bench backward with a dull scrape. The silence that followed was absolute. No footsteps, no whisper, no sign of anyone else. Only the faint scent of old wood polish and something else, something floral and faintly smoky, like her grandmother's perfume. Emma steadied her breath. "You're just tired," she murmured. Long drive, empty house, too many memories. But as she started toward the door, a sound rose behind her. A soft plink, one key pressed, then another. She turned slowly. The piano keys moved not wildly, not ghostly, just two, pressed gently, like someone testing them after years of silence. The notes were quiet, deliberate, forming the beginning of a melody she recognized instantly, though she didn't know from where. It was haunting a sequence of notes that tugged at something deep inside her chest. Emma felt tears prick her eyes. "Thomas?" she whispered before she could stop herself. The air seemed to sigh. She stepped closer again, her hands trembling. "If this is some kind of trick," she said softly. But her voice broke on the word. There was no one to trick her. The house was empty. She sank back onto the piano bench. The melody still lingered in her mind, 4 repeating notes. A rise, a pause, a fall. It looped endlessly, like a song that had waited too long to be finished. On impulse, she reached into the piano's upper lid, searching. Her grandmother used to hide small things there, sheet music, family photos, even birthday cards. Her fingers brushed against something rough. It was a folded piece of paper, brittle and crumbling at the edges. She pulled it out carefully. It was handwritten sheet music, ink faded but still readable. At the top, a title, Autumn Waltz, 1952. The composer's name underneath stopped her cold. Thomas Whitmore, her uncle, the man who had disappeared. Emma's throat tightened. "So it was his song," she whispered. The notation was elegant but slightly smudged, as though it had been written in haste. And near the bottom of the final page, a single line was added in handwriting different from the rest, smaller, more delicate, and unmistakably her grandmother's. "Play it when you're ready to remember." Her breath hitched. For a long moment she just stared at the message. Her grandmother had died 5 months ago, peacefully, quietly, in her sleep. They'd found the funeral arrangements already written, everything perfectly in order. But this felt like something left unfinished. Emma placed the paper on the stand, aligning it perfectly. She ran her fingertips across the faded ink, then began to play. The song was simple at first, a waltz, slow and tender, but as it unfolded, something inside her shifted. Each note carried the weight of something unsaid, longing, regret, love. She played the opening again, and this time, she could almost hear another pianist following her, the faint echo of Thomas's melody weaving beneath her own. The room began to feel alive. The curtains moved, though no breeze entered. The mirror's surface shimmered faintly again, the way sunlight flickers on water. She didn't stop. Her grandmother's words replayed in her mind. "Play it when you're ready to remember." And then, as she reached the final verse, a delicate accent, she heard it. A man's voice, faint but clear, humming along with the tune. Emma froze, her hands hovering over the keys. The humming stopped the instant she did. "Who's there?" she whispered, barely breathing. No answer, only silence, and the faint echo of the melody still hanging in the air. She turned toward the hallway, and there, on the small table by the door, something she hadn't noticed before. A framed photograph. It showed her grandmother in her 20s, sitting beside a young man at a piano. His features were strikingly familiar, the same eyes as her father, the same mischievous smile. The inscription on the frame read, "Thomas and Lillian Rosewood Hall, 1952. 952. Emma lifted the photo gently, her hands trembling, and then she noticed something strange. The reflection in the glass. Behind her in the mirror, she saw not one figure at the piano, but two. The photo trembled in Emma's hands. The reflection in its glass showed something she didn't dare to believe. Two figures at the piano. One of them her, the other faint, translucent, like a smudge of light shaped into a man. But when she turned around, the space behind her was empty. Her pulse pounded in her ears. The room felt too still, too watchful. She placed the photo down carefully, afraid that if she dropped it, whatever thread connected her to that image would snap. She whispered, "Thomas, what are you trying to tell me?" The answer came not in words, but in sound. The piano released a single note, low, resonant, as if in response. Emma swallowed hard. The air in the room seemed charged, like the moment before a storm breaks. She stepped back to the piano bench and sat down again, her fingers hovering over the keys. She began to play the Autumn Waltz once more. This time, the notes flowed smoother, stronger the way muscle remembers, even when the mind does not. Halfway through the piece, she noticed something strange. Between bars of the melody, her uncle had written faint annotations, not musical ones, but letters, tiny letters in the margins. R.W.H. She frowned. Rosewood Hall, she murmured, reading the initials again. The same name written on the photo frame. The memory hit her like a gust of cold air, a story her grandmother once told her when she was small. Thomas played his final concert at Rosewood Hall, she'd said, staring out the window. They said he never came home, but sometimes I still hear him practicing. Emma set the sheet music down, her mind racing. Rosewood Hall was only 30 miles from here, a crumbling estate that had been abandoned for decades. If her grandmother's note said, "Play it when you're ready to remember," then maybe the melody wasn't just about grief. Maybe it was a map. She gathered the papers, folded the note, and took one last look at the mirror before leaving. The faint shape beside her was gone, replaced only by the tired reflection of a woman who suddenly felt like a child again. The road to Rosewood wound through autumn-colored hills. Leaves spun across the windshield, and the sky hung low and gray. The estate appeared just as she remembered it from childhood stories, ivy strangling its stone walls, windows boarded and broken, iron gates hanging crooked. A private property sign leaned uselessly in the grass. Emma parked just outside and slipped through the gap in the fence. The air was damp and heavy with decay. Birds scattered from the eaves as she approached the main door. Inside, dust blanketed everything. The grand staircase sagged, the wallpaper peeled in long strips, and the faint echo of her footsteps filled the hollow space. But beneath it all, something else hummed a vibration so soft she almost mistook it for her heartbeat. She followed it down the hall until she reached a ballroom. Sunlight filtered through fractured windows, landing on a single object at the center of the room, a grand piano, its lid half open, the wood scarred and faded but unmistakably the same brand as her grandmother's. Her breath caught. The initials TW were carved near the fallboard. She approached slowly. A thin film of dust covered the keys. She brushed it away with her fingertips. The same sensation returned, that quiet awareness, that almost living stillness. Something glimmered beneath the keys. She crouched and pulled out a small envelope wedged between the frame and the floorboard. On the front, written in faint, hurried script, "For Lillian, my last song." Her grandmother's name. Emma's throat tightened. She tore it open. Inside was a letter written in the same looping handwriting as the sheet music. "Dearest Lillian, if you're reading this, the song has found its way back to you. They wanted to sell the hall, to erase the past, but I couldn't let them take what we built. The melody is our secret, a promise in waltz time. Every note holds your name." The paper trembled in her hands. The words were dated the 18th of September 1952, the very night he disappeared. At the bottom of the page, another line, scribbled hastily, "If the piano still plays, I'll be waiting." Emma's eyes filled with tears. She sat down on the old bench, its wood cold against her skin, and placed her hands on the keys. The sound that rose wasn't just music. It was memory itself. The melody unfurled through the empty hall, echoing against the cracked walls. And somewhere between the verses, she heard it again, the faint hum of another voice, deep and gentle, carrying the harmony. Thomas was still here. The final chord trembled through the ruins of Rosewood Hall, long and sorrowful, until the echo dissolved into stillness. The air smelled faintly of smoke, old smoke, the kind that never fully leaves a place once it's burned. Emma sat frozen at the piano, her pulse a steady drum in her ears. The light through the broken windows had turned amber, setting dust motes adrift like tiny ghosts. For a long while she couldn't move. Then, from somewhere deep inside the piano, something shifted, a dull click, followed by a soft creak. A hidden compartment had opened beneath the keys. She leaned forward, heart pounding, and pulled out a small wooden box no larger than a book. The lid bore the initials TW in gold, slightly tarnished. She hesitated, then opened it. Inside were three things: a torn concert program dated the 18th of September 1952, a locket with a photograph of her grandmother Lillian, smiling shyly beside the same piano, and a charred sheet of music titled The Fire Waltz. Emma stared at the last item. The edges blackened, the ink still visible where the flames hadn't reached. Across the top, written in frantic script, were words that made her blood run cold. "If you hear this song, run." The moment she read it, the room seemed to exhale a rush of air, a groan from the ceiling, the faint whisper of something unseen. She looked around, whispering, "Run from what?" The piano answered with a low, accidental note, vibrating softly as if alive. And then, as though a film reel had begun to play, fragments of memory filled her mind, not her own memories, but images she couldn't possibly know. She saw her grandmother, young and radiant, standing in this same hall with Thomas. He was at the piano, playing with feverish intensity. Men in suits entered through the back doors, arguing, voices sharp, angry, then smoke, shouting, the sudden flare of firelight. Emma gasped and stumbled backward, clutching the box to her chest. The vision faded as quickly as it came, leaving behind the same silence that always followed the truth. She sank onto the dusty floor, tears streaking her face. "Did they kill you, Thomas?" she whispered. "Did someone set the fire?" The only reply was the soft creak of the old chandelier swaying overhead. She opened the concert program, her hands trembling. On the inside page, a list of performers, pianists, singers, composers. Next to Thomas Whitmore's name, someone had drawn a small black X. And in the margin, in handwriting that wasn't his, 2 words, "Too dangerous." Emma's mind spun. Why would a young pianist be considered dangerous? Unless the concert or the music itself was more than it seemed. She turned the burn sheet over. Beneath the title, The Fire Waltz, faint lines of musical notation glimmered. There was something hidden there, something strange. The notes weren't arranged, like a normal melody. They formed shapes, almost like letters. She squinted, tracing the pattern with her finger. It spelled out one word, Lillian. Her breath caught. The melody itself had been his message, a coded confession disguised as a song. She reached for the piano again and played the sequence as written, careful to follow every marked pause. The sound was haunting, dissonant, incomplete. But as she reached the final chord, the floorboards beneath her feet trembled. From somewhere beneath the hall came a faint, rhythmic tapping, slow, deliberate, impossible. She followed the sound down a side corridor where an old door led to the basement. The air grew colder as she descended, her flashlight beam catching cobwebs and fallen beams. The tapping grew louder and then stopped. She reached the bottom. The concrete walls were blackened, the air thick with soot. In the center stood an old trunk, chained shut. Emma hesitated, every instinct screaming to turn back. But curiosity or destiny held her still. She crouched beside the trunk and brushed off decades of grime. The lock had long since rusted away. With a deep breath, she pried the lid open. Inside were scorched papers, fragments of sheet music, and beneath them, a small tin canister sealed tight. She opened it and found inside a roll of magnetic tape, the kind used for reel-to-reel recordings. On the label, written in shaky ink, Rosewood Hall, final rehearsal, the 18th of September, 1952. Emma clutched it to her chest, tears spilling freely now. The piano upstairs had stopped playing, but somehow she knew the real song had only just begun. Back in her grandmother's house, the evening settled heavy and gray over the quiet neighborhood. Emma sat cross-legged on the living room floor, the tin canister resting beside her like a relic. She had borrowed an old reel-to-reel player from a local antique shop that afternoon, explaining she was restoring a family recording. The owner had smiled knowingly, unaware of the weight those words carried. Now, as she threaded the tape through the spools, her hands trembled. The machine smelled faintly of oil and time. She pressed play. A crackle of static filled the room, then a voice. Testing. Testing. Thomas Whitmore. Rehearsal at Rosewood Hall. September 18th, 1952. Emma froze. The voice was unmistakable, smooth, calm, but edged with the nervous energy of youth. It was him. Piano keys followed a simple scale at first, then a flourish, as though he were warming up. She could almost see him sitting there, the sleeves of his white shirt rolled up, his fingers restless. Then another voice entered, her grandmother's. "You shouldn't record this, Thomas. If they find out—" "They won't," he interrupted. "If something happens, this will prove it wasn't an accident." Emma's hand flew to her mouth. The piano music swelled beneath their words, soft but insistent. Then Thomas spoke again, his voice quieter now, closer to the microphone. "They're coming tonight, Lil. They want the rights to the waltz. Said it's theirs now, but this song, it's ours. It means something. Promise me if I can't finish it, you'll play it one day." Her grandmother's voice trembled. "Thomas, please." The sound warped suddenly, the tape catching, stretching before snapping back. Then came the unmistakable crackle of fire, the words she had longed to say for years to her grandmother, to Thomas, to every voice the house had ever held. A soft breeze slipped through the half-open window, carrying the faint scent of lilacs, her grandmother's favorite. The air seemed to shimmer for a moment, and Emma thought she heard a faint echo of laughter, the sound of piano keys, and two voices, one young, one old, playing together. She smiled through her tears. "You can rest now," she said softly. The rest of the day passed in a calm, dreamlike rhythm. She cleaned the parlor, dusted the shelves, and opened the windows wide, letting sunlight pour in. For the first time in decades, the house didn't feel haunted. It felt alive. That evening, she sat at the piano one last time. The surface was warm under her fingertips, as if the wood itself carried a pulse. She placed her grandmother's letter on the music stand and began to play the Autumn Waltz, not as a haunting now, but as a farewell. Outside, the sun sank into the horizon, painting the sky in hues of gold and rose. The melody filled the house, gentle and full, echoing off the walls that had once known only sorrow. As the final note faded, she whispered, "Thank you for remembering me too." She closed the lid of the piano, locking it gently. For the first time, she didn't feel afraid to leave it behind. The story was complete, the promise kept. When she turned to go, she noticed something new, a faint glow on the piano's surface, right where her grandmother's letter had been. The reflection took shape for a moment, two figures, side by side at the keys, then faded into the golden light. Emma smiled, tears tracing down her cheeks. "I'll keep the song alive," she whispered. And as the light faded from the room, it almost sounded like the piano sighed in agreement. Months passed, and winter gave way to spring. The Whitmore house, once a place of silence and dust, now carried the quiet hum of new life. Emma had decided to stay, at least for a while. The walls that once seemed heavy with memories now felt like old friends whispering their stories. She had repaired the piano, restoring its faded varnish, replacing broken strings, polishing every key by hand. The scars on its surface remained, but she didn't want them gone. They were reminders that beauty doesn't vanish when life burns it. It just learns to play in a different key. The piano no longer played on its own. It didn't need to. The house was at peace. And Emma, for the first time in years, was too. Every Sunday afternoon she opened the windows wide, let the sunlight in, and played Autumn Waltz. The neighbors would sometimes stop outside to listen, leaning against their fences, smiling softly. One of them, an older man, once asked, "What's that song called?" Emma had smiled. "It's called the Fire Waltz. My family wrote it." She didn't tell him the rest, that the melody had bridged 70 years of silence, or that each note carried a heartbeat that had waited all that time to be heard. Some stories belonged not to words, but to the space between them. On her grandmother's birthday, she recorded a final version of the song. The audio file she titled simply, "The Piano That Remembered." She uploaded it online with a short description. A song once lost to fire, now found again. May it remind you that memory, like music, never truly fades. Within days, messages began to appear beneath the post, strangers from across the world sharing their own stories. A grandfather's guitar rediscovered in an attic, a mother's old lullaby remembered after decades. The melody became a quiet gathering place for everyone who had ever lost and found something through time. Emma read every comment, tears in her eyes, realizing what her grandmother had meant. The world will always forget its songs, but if someone remembers, that's enough. One evening, as twilight spilled across the parlor, she sat once more at the piano. The house glowed in amber light. Outside, lilacs bloomed, and the faint hum of crickets filled the air. She began to play softly, almost whispering to the keys. The melody floated upward, weaving through the golden air, wrapping the house in its familiar warmth. As she reached the final verse, the reflection in the polished wood shifted. For the briefest second, she saw them both, Thomas and Lillian, standing behind her, smiling, listening. Not ghosts, not sadness, just presence. When the last chord faded, she whispered into the quiet, "I kept the song alive." The air seemed to shimmer, and in the faintest echo, like wind brushing through the rafters, she heard a voice, her grandmother's, soft and certain. "And it kept you alive too, my dear." Emma smiled through her tears, closing the lid one final time. She stood by the window, watching the sunset reflect off the keys. The light made the piano glow, as if every memory inside it had turned to gold. As the scene faded into the quiet hum of evening, the house stood calm, once more filled not with silence, but with music that would never be forgotten. Because in the end, it wasn't just a piano that remembered. It was love. It was family. It was time itself learning how to sing again. If this story touched your heart, let us know in the comments below. Your memories might inspire our next story. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more emotional stories that echo through time. Because sometimes, the past doesn't fade. It plays one more song before saying goodbye.